He has a name. He's a former champion. He fought both Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez. He's willing to fight anybody. So I think there's a ton of opportunity for him in this phase of his career.
Welcome into Boxing Scene's top stories on ProBox TV. Download the ProBox TV app. Never fall behind in your boxing news. Of course, Canelo Alvarez, the big news, fighting Edgar Berlanga this weekend. But on the same card, Trevor McCumbee taking on Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant so good at staying in the boxing news by going after someone about something all the time. Love me, hate me, don't ignore me. But he says that Canelo should win against Berlanga. But he's going back and forth with Berlanga as though he's trying to set up that fight next. Where is he going? What is he doing? To help me figure it out, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi, and ESPN boxing analyst Timothy Bradley. Chris, let's start with you. This is a guy in Caleb Plant. We've interviewed him on our air. He's always going after somebody, staying relevant, staying in the news. But what fight do you think it sets up for his next move? What do you think his game plan is?
He's one of the least active, most relevant guys in the sport. I mean, he really stays he keeps himself very marketable. And I think when it comes to these arguments, I don't think he's setting up fights. I just think he's being who he is. And, you know, we interviewed him about that, and I asked him about the quote-unquote animosity he's showing towards his opponent in McCumbee. And then he said, nah, it's real. It's always real. All of it's real. I think for him, a lot of it is getting himself into mindset of competition, which I understand. You know, you think of like a Michael Jordan when he's, you know, thinking his opponents are his actual enemies, and that was a game. This is fight sports. So I understand where he's coming from. I think that's part of his mental preparation for these kinds of situations. Also, you know, coming from where he's from, he's used to stepping up and dealing with situations when they come to a head. And listen, we're a bunch of fighters walking around each other. You know, stuff happens. And, you know, some guys let more things slide than others. He doesn't seem to let things slide. Also, when you're not that active, you got a lot more animus walking around in your body. He hasn't punched somebody in the face in 14 months. So, you know, at a professional level. So you're gonna be a little angry. I remember when I wasn't busy in fights, I was walking around with a chip on my shoulder too. So it could be partly that. So I don't think he's just necessarily setting up fights. I think it works out that way. He stays very marketable. He stays in the public eye, which has been great for him, especially for someone so inactive. But for him, I think there's a lot of good fights for him. He has a name. He's a former champion. He fought both Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez. He's willing to fight anybody. So I think there's a ton of opportunity for him in this phase of his career. He just has to get active.
What's your thought on that, Paulie, when it comes to, let's assume he does win the McCumbee fight. He's a heavy favorite in that one. Could there be a rematch with a victorious Canelo, or would there be a rematch with Berlanga? Should Berlanga win or lose? What's your thought on his next move?
You know, listen, I think Caleb is going to be one of the more popular guys in the weight class. Number one, he has fought Canelo, so he's had that Canelo experience. And I think he's come out better for it. I think he's a better fighter, mentally up here for it. You know, you're not going to see him getting the wins as he was coming up the ladder because now he's at that high level. But I think he remains in people's mindset, and he remains a curiosity in the 168-pound division because he's had that fight and he continues to fight at a high level and show that he is at a high level. Even in defeat, he fights at a high level and gets his respect. I also think Caleb it's not acting. I think this kid's a goon, man. I think this man is a goon. Sorry, he's not a kid anymore. He's a man is a goon. I mean, he's straight up, man. And I think he's showing it. And Champ, you make a good point. You know, it's maybe because he's not been active and he's in a bad mood and, you know, he's got to let out the anger somewhere. And so he's got a little bit of a short fuse. You know, Champ, once he retires, you got to figure out a way, one way or the other, right? So hopefully he gets himself calmer before he retires. But yeah, I mean, I think 168-pound division is a little bit locked up, even if there's a lot of good fighters. But there's an opportunity for Caleb if he stays active. This is looked at as a warm-up fight. Unless McCumbee pulls off a tremendous upset, Caleb should probably win and then look to bigger and better fights as opposed to just being on the sidelines again, as he's been lately. Yeah, I think that it's necessary for him to fight, both for his mood and for his own career. You know, even at these fights, he's getting into arguments. You know, I think we saw he threw something at Ryan Garcia too. Listen, I don't go to fights anymore because I'll slap the shit out of a fan. You know what I mean? So it's one of the reasons I don't like to be.
You know better, champ.
So I think Caleb needs to fight because he doesn't really have that choice. He's active, so he's got to keep his brand up and be at these fights. So I think the best thing for Caleb to do is be active. And I think there's a demand for Caleb to be active. He's one of the more popular guys in boxing.
Tim, I got to ask you, you were kind of a nice guy outside the ring, a mean guy in the ring. Sugar Ray Leonard, we talked about that. Nice guy outside the ring, vicious inside the ring. And then those guys, Bernard Hopkins is a great example. He's mean outside the ring, he's mean in the ring. What's your thought of that connection? Is it necessary? Does it make a fighter bigger in the public eye to be mean inside and outside the ring?
Look, he does interviews and he just answers the questions, whether fighters like it or not and what he's saying. But I can just tell you this, that when Caleb Plant talks, everybody should listen. Yep. This is a guy that is full of wisdom. I mean, if you know his backstory and where he's came from, and you really take that in consideration, you really think that he was able to overcome everything, every obstacle he's been through. I mean, growing up in the trailer park, dirt poor, and, trying to make parents trying to make ends meet. Mother was a drug addict, from losing his daughter, then 4 years later, losing his mom. Man, he's been through so much traumatic stress that he's a serious guy, and there's nothing that you can't tell him because he's been through so much. So when you ask him a question, you're going to get a real answer, his real opinion, a real statement from a Caleb Plant. So, with that being said, I think that he has control of everything. And when he does have control, I think that's when we see the best Caleb Plant. As far as what's his name? Who is he facing? McCumbee. As far as McCumbee goes, McCumbee is a guy that definitely needs to be respected. And Caleb, he knows that. He's wise enough to understand that. Caleb knows that he has more experience. However, McCumbee isn't no slouch. He isn't. Let me tell you that. He has a great amateur background as well. He started very young. He's not a guy that started late. He started extremely young. He had a few setbacks. He got caught on the juice. He did in 2016. He was on the juice. He got caught. Yes. And had a little hiatus afterwards, I think 18 months, then hurt his knee. But now he's back. And the one thing that stood out to me was that Cameron Duncan was interested in him. And Cameron Duncan if you guys don't know, was a renowned manager. And he's a guy that had an eye for talent. And if he had this guy on his radar and managed him, then he can fight. So I respect McCumbee a whole hell of a lot. And Caleb, I think he's wise enough and experienced enough to know that he's going to have to respect him also, but he can compartmentalize everything that he's saying and doing right now and still be ready for the fight. So I'm expecting a hell of a fight, to be honest with you, by both these men. Both these men got a lot to gain, and they also got a lot to lose. If Caleb loses this fight, I mean, I don't know where he goes from here. If McCumbee loses this fight, then he's going to have to rebuild again. And that's just it. But both these guys in their early 30s, and it should be a fantastic fight. I think a more competitive fight than what people is giving it.
Well, we are looking forward to a great one. Remember, on the same card as Canelo Alvarez, September 14th, it is Caleb Plant versus Trevor McCumbee. We've talked to both men. Check out on ProBox TV our interviews with both of those fighters and get ready for September 14th.
He's the pride of Guadalajara, the Mexican maestro, the unified super middleweight champion of the world, Canelo Alvarez. His challenger, undefeated knockout artist and pride of Puerto Rico, EDGAR Berlanga. It's prime time.
Canelo versus Berlanga, plus Lara versus Garcia, Saturday, September 14th, live on PBC pay-per-view on Prime Video.
Don't miss evenly matched, high-action fights, Wednesday night fights on ProBox TV. Scan the QR code on the screen or go to the App Store and Google Play.